Nazanin Afshan-Jam McKay is joining me at the media line. What a very interesting woman, someone who really has dedicated her life to human rights and to really taking a stand on very important issues today. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you, Felice, for having me.
Nazanin, I just want to give a little bit of background onto who you are, an Iranian Canadian human rights activist and mother. You also won the beauty pageant for Canada in 2003, songwriter. You also are someone who is well studied international relations degree, diplomacy, political science, and you run a foundation, the Nazanin Foundation, as well as Stop Child Executions. I don't know, they always say that when you give somebody who's busy something more, they usually can handle it. There's a lot on your
Mhm.
plate today with what's happening. Let me begin with what's happening in Iran. I think that it's near and dear. You are of descent of Iranian, parents. What's going through your mind right now as you're witnessing a regime that could crack or not? You're witnessing mass brutal killings on the streets of Iran. And really, they say 1 million people have come out on the streets over the past weeks.
Yes, Felice, it's really a mix of emotions for all of us. On the one end, the nation is really mourning. There's tens of thousands that have been killed, hundreds of thousands that have been injured, and so many that are currently detained and possibly going to be executed in the coming days. So, almost every family member that I've spoken to inside Iran, my friends, they know of somebody or have somebody in their family that has been affected by this. Either they're now dead or injured. And so, we're all quite sad, horrified by the level of violence. As you know, this regime has occupied the people for 46, 47 years and have unleashed such egregious human rights abuses. But we'd never seen anything like we've seen in the past few weeks. Military grade weapons used on innocent people, machine guns mowing them down, and not only leaving it there, but hunting for the injured inside hospitals and finishing them off with bullets to the head, dumping them in mass graves or keeping them in warehouses piles high where families are now having to root through them and trying to find their loved ones. So it's a really tense time, but also there's a glimmer of hope. The Iranian people really feel like this is the one chance that they have to reclaim their country. And it seems like all the ingredients are lined up or were lined up in terms of the millions of people that came out in the streets chanting that they want a complete end to this regime. The fact that there's a US president who is bold enough to take it to this level where there's aircraft carriers at the ready if these quote unquote negotiations don't go through. The European countries have finally listed the IRGC on the terrorist list, which gives an indication that they're starting to be on the side of the people. Of course, Canada and some other countries, Australia, and had already listed the IRGC on the terrorist list. So the political will is getting there, and so we're all waiting. We're waiting to see this week, next week, if there is going to be some kind of intervention, because the Iranian people at this stage, with their bare hands up against this militarized state, um, they have nothing to rely on except for this international help coming through. They're begging the international community to help free them from this oppression.
Nazanin, this is very near and dear to you to heart. Your father was imprisoned in Iran and escaped, basically. Share that story.
It was at the start of the 1979 revolution. I was only a baby. My father was working as the general manager of the Sheraton Hotel. And at that time, we didn't know what all the new rules were in terms of this Islamist regime coming in and setting out Sharia law. My father was allowing for mingling between men and women and alcohol at the hotel, just things that were normal that he had always done. But the Revolutionary Guards burst in and arrested him and tortured him, and they were going to execute him, but by some fatal luck, my mother managed to get him out until he'd have a trial. But of course, they weren't going to wait around for that, as his friends and colleagues had all been executed. So he was on the first plane ride to Spain after his wounds healed enough that he could actually sit down. And then we followed, and then a year later, we immigrated to Canada.
Take a moment to talk about your mom.
She passed away a few years ago, but I keep her ashes because I'm so hopeful that Iran will be free soon and I can deliver her ashes and bury it in the mausoleum where her parents and ancestors were buried. She had such a love for the culture and the people, and she just had such a wonderful life before the 1979. Her father was a general in the Shah's army, and her mother was such a wonderful spirited woman. The pictures that I see of them at the parties and in, their mini skirts and, uh, going to the south and picking fruit off the tree. Just she characterized a very idealistic lifestyle at that time. And of course, her life felt very shattered when she was forced to leave. And I mean, of course, we had a wonderful life growing up in Canada, but being separated from family and the lifestyle that she knew before, that broken heart stayed with her until her very last days.
Some say she had converted to Christianity. Did she?
Yes, that's right. When she was a teenager, she read the Bible and she said, "Who is this man that thinks exactly like me?" And the more she learned, and she became very spiritual and had a very close connection to Jesus. And uh, luckily for my sister and I, we were raised in the Christian faith, and I'm a big believer as well. And so that's the best gift she ever gave me, is introducing me to God.
You were in Israel. Talk about God. You were at the WCC, you were speaking, and very beautiful organization pulled together an incredible group of women as a cohort to really change things, change up the dynamics in the world. What did you walk away with from that trip?
It was an incredible trip. First of all, going to the Holy Land itself is just such a spiritual occurrence and journey. But the WCC members, all incredibly talented, accomplished women from across the Middle East, Palestine, Israel, of course, across the MENA region, North Africa, and the UAE, and I'm of Iranian descent, and it brought together, it's a network really of women. We were building synergy and speaking about our various projects. And since we've met, we've already started collaborating on different projects. And the whole mindset is that women champions of change can come together to change the outlook, not just in the Middle East, but the world. And I mean, there's proven studies that if women are involved in positions of leadership or peace negotiations, the outcome is much more successful over long term than if it's just purely men. We thought a lot of the men are what brought us into some of these problems, and perhaps so women can have an influence in bringing us closer to the ideals of peace and prosperity in our various respective regions.
Along that line of thinking, the room is filled with men who are negotiating between Iran and the rest of the world. It isn't women. And right now, it's a touch and go with a lot of shuttle diplomacy. Sad to
Mhm.
say, the day that it stops, what are you most fearful of?
just the very fact that Western liberal democracies, their leaders, are still, quote unquote, negotiating with a terrorist regime already deflates our spirit. Um, Obama, Biden, and other leaders have negotiated with this child murdering, gender apartheid regime for this many years, and nothing has been achieved except for death and destruction. So I don't know how anybody in their right mind could think that you can negotiate with people that in their Islamist edicts say that it is okay to lie if it's for the expansion and extension of Islam. So I just think there is no negotiating with a terrorist regime. And, on Friday, Witkoff and Kushner sat down with the foreign minister Araghchi to negotiate on the nuclear terms. But of course, I don't think anywhere in those negotiations were any talk of the innocent Iranian people who have been slaughtered in the past days. If there are any kind of negotiations, it should come with caveats. It should come with um, assurances that the Iranian people's rights are protected. But even at that, I don't believe them. They've always obfuscated and lied about anything. Even if they say they're not going to continue with nuclear um, proliferation, I wouldn't even believe that. I would imagine that they would find some secret location to continue building. So um, I think we need more women at the table to start to inject some more humanity in these negotiations.
You've spoken out in government, in Canada, in other places, very, very strongly against many of the things that we have begun to discuss here, also about child executions. Can you elaborate on your work?
Yes, my work began around 2003. I had learned of another woman in Iran named Nazanin, my namesake, who she was a teenager and she was on death row. She had attacked the man who had tried to rape her. In fact, three men had tried to rape her and her niece. But instead of being treated as a victim, she was tried as a first-rate criminal and sentenced to death. Now, of course, that's outrageous. And I started a campaign to try to save her life. And after a year long of meeting with government leaders around the world and doing media and speaking to really anybody who would listen and starting a petition, which we had garnered about 350,000 signatures, uh, eventually there was so much pressure on the regime in Iran that they were forced to give her a new trial. And in that trial, she was exonerated of the murder charges. And finally, after many steps, she was released. Now she's free. She's has a family of four, and she's all right. But in that process, I had learned of 160 other children on death row, which compelled me to start the Stop Child Executions organization to put an end to executions, not just in Iran, but other parts. But of course, Iran had the most number of executions in the world for not just children, but per capita for adults as well. And we managed to save a dozen or more lives just through advocacy and pressure. But our websites kept getting crashed because of the cyber army of the regime, and it was not sustainable. And I got to a point where I thought I can't keep putting band-aids on these terrible problems, which we know what the root of the cause is, just the fact that this regime exists alone. So then my advocacy started to shift more to democracy building and trying to put a complete end to the regime. Of course, I always advocated for an end to the regime, but that became a lot of my focus. And since that time, especially since the Woman Life Freedom Revolutionary Movement just in 2002, where again, hundreds of thousands of people rose up to demand an end to this regime, my activities have been really full time to try to awaken world leaders and parliamentarians so that they understand that there's a clear differentiation between the regime and Iran and the Iranian people and members of this regime. So 80 to 85% of Iranian people want a complete change of regime. There's still maybe 10-15% that are extremist Islamists that want to keep this regime going. So that kind of was the journey, and started an organization called Iranian Justice Collective to do more advocacy, particularly in Canada. And I also have a network of 100 Iranian diaspora groups and 200 very active advocates who are not affiliated with any groups. And we get together and we try to create programs to try to advance this cause. So it's full force. We're continuing on with this mission. For me, it's a calling. And I do believe that light always beats the darkness, and we will get there.
You're surrounded by politics. You're married to the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada. When you discuss these issues with your husband and friends and other people who are really astute in this area, are you surprised that so many people of the world have not really cried out about this issue? Not nearly enough, considering the vast amount of execution for point blank killings. We reported about people being alive in body bags, being sent to morgues alive. These things are horrific. Just even saying them are really difficult to state.
It's been painful, Felice. Um, I mean, here I live in a small rural town in Nova Scotia, and just at the hockey rink, at the soccer um, stadium, was just speaking to colleagues. They have no idea this is happening. So, in part, media is not covering it to the extent that we would like. I mean, if we think back during the Bosnian genocide in Srebrenica, then 8,000 people were killed. And there was so much media, and the international community responded with responsibility to protect. And this time, 4 times at least the number were killed in half the time. And yet, where is the response? And same with human rights groups who, were so quick to come out on the streets in our cities, in Toronto, in Montreal, and where have you, to, you know, say that, pro-Palestinian uprisings, but there's been crickets on Iran. There's so many innocent Iranians that have been killed. And yes, a lot of Iranians have come out on the streets. In fact, in Toronto, 150,000 people came out to say that there needs to be some kind of meaningful action, not just words of condemnation from our leaders, but from the general public, very
Why?
little.
Why?
Thankfully,
Why?
Israeli friends have come out on the streets with their flags. Why? Because it doesn't fit in their narrative, unfortunately. I think in a small part, this Islamist regime has funded in the billions terrorist factions like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like the Houthis, and it would be counter to their narrative. Some of these people on the left, let's just call them that, to try to now paint this Islamist regime as an enemy, when it's that enemy that has been funding even some of these protests that we see on the campuses in Montreal, in New York, and where have you. Uh, it is so hypocritical and painful on our behalf, and especially the repetition of propaganda of this regime that this is some kind of Israeli or American led uprising. It is absolutely not. It is grassroots. It's the Iranian people who are demanding this. And thankfully, we have some friends in the West that have recognized this. But other than that, we feel very alone.
Women's International Day is not that far off. And as a woman who is dedicated and who really makes a difference, what is your hope this year?
I hope that women's rights groups around the world recognize that this, as I called it, a gender apartheid regime exists. They don't just discriminate against women. They just don't persecute women. They segregate women. They literally in the law, it's written that women are worth half of a man under the law, that their testimony in court is worth half of a man. They're not allowed to travel without permission from their husbands or fathers. They're not allowed to enter a stadium. They can't ride a bike. There's discrimination in divorce cases, inheritance, custody, you name it. Women are treated as second-class citizens, if not worse than cattle sometimes. So it's incumbent upon our sisters around the world to join hands with us and to speak out against this. In the West, they talk about bodily autonomy. Well, what about the bodily autonomy of the Iranian women who are forced, subjected to wear a hijab? They don't get the choice. They are forced to, and if they don't, you can go to prison, you're raped, and like Gina Masa Amini in 2002, just because of her veil not properly covering her head, she was beaten and she went into a coma and died a few days later. And that's what sparked that revolution. It was a women's led revolution, the last round. And we are counting on our sisters to stand up with us in solidarity.
Well, Nazanin, it's a lot to do out there. It's not simple. It's very, very intense and complex, but women can make a difference, and you're definitely one of them. Thank you for joining the
Thank you.
media line.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity. And I hope your viewers will take a minute to do one simple act to help our Iranian people that are so desperate at this time. Thank you.